The rancher ordered a bride, but her sister stepped off the wagon instead. Wyatt Holt stood at the edge of the ranch, his hands resting on the worn wooden fence. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the dry, cracked earth of Black Ridge. The cattle moved slowly in the distance, but Wyatt's mind wasn't on them. His thoughts were far away, focused on the letter in his pocket. The letter that would change his life. A few months ago, Wyatt had made a decision. His ranch, which he'd built from the ground up, had become too much to handle alone. It was vast, stretching for miles with the wind always howling across the plains. Wyatt needed help. He needed a partner. And as the days grew lonelier, he decided to find a wife. He hadn't been looking for much. Someone who could help on the ranch, a woman who could handle the hard life out here, someone who could be a companion in his quiet, solitary world. So, when a traveling saleswoman came through Black Ridge selling a new service that promised to connect people with brides from across the galaxy, Wyatt had taken the leap. He had filled out a form, chosen a woman from the profiles, and waited. And now, after months of waiting, the day had finally arrived. The wagon carrying his bride was due any minute. Wyatt's heart thudded in his chest as he stared down the dusty road. He had imagined this moment for so long. He had pictured the woman he would meet, the one who would walk off the wagon with a smile, someone who would be ready to work beside him, someone who could make this ranch feel like home. The wagon appeared in the distance, a cloud of dust rising behind it as it crept closer. Wyatt stood taller, straightening his coat. He had heard that Celia, his bride, was a beautiful woman, and he had pictured her as someone graceful, someone who would fit in with his quiet life on the ranch. He could already see her, long flowing hair, soft eyes, a gentle smile. But as the wagon stopped and the dust settled, it was not Celia who stepped out. It was her younger sister, Jenna. Wyatt blinked, his heart racing. The woman before him was nothing like the bride he had ordered. Jenna was wild-eyed, with a look of defiance in her stance. Her hair was shorter, messier than he expected, and her clothes were worn from travel. She didn't seem shy or demure. She seemed like someone who had lived a hard life, someone who had seen more than her share of trouble. Jenna glanced at Wyatt with a mixture of curiosity and confusion, as if she were wondering why he looked so disappointed. I'm sorry, I think there's been some mistake," Wyatt stammered, his voice shaky as he tried to make sense of the situation. "I was expecting Celia." Jenna raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms over her chest. "I'm not Celia," she said with a dry smile. "I'm her sister, Jenna. She's not here. She's the one who was supposed to come." He had been so sure, so certain that this would be the woman who would walk off the wagon and into his life. But instead, this stranger was standing in front of him, looking like someone who had just stepped out of a storm. Jenna was taller than Celia, with broad shoulders that suggested she was no stranger to hard work. Her face was sharp, with a strong jawline, and her eyes were a bright blue that shone with an energy Wyatt hadn't expected. She had a look of someone who didn't take orders from anyone. "You can't be here," Wyatt said, shaking his head. "The agreement, it was with Celia. I paid for her." Jenna sighed and took a step forward. "I know. Celia's gone, and I'm here to find her. If you think I'm going back, you've got another thing coming. I've been through a lot, and I'm not about to turn around just because things didn't go the way you planned." Wyatt stood there, his mind reeling. This was not what he had imagined. He had expected a quiet, gentle woman who could fit into his life without causing too much disruption. But Jenna was different. She was bold, confident, and, she didn't seem like the kind of woman who would quietly accept anything. "What's your plan, then?" Wyatt asked, still unsure of what to do. "You're not staying here, are you?" "But I can't exactly go to the matchmaking service and ask for a refund, and I'm not about to go wandering through the desert looking for her. So I guess I'm staying here until I figure things out." This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He had a life, a routine, and a plan. He had not planned on getting involved with a stranger, let alone one who seemed so unpredictable. But Jenna's presence, wild and untamed, was already beginning to fill the empty spaces on his ranch. There was something about her, a fire that couldn't be ignored. He wasn't sure if it was the anger in her eyes or the way her hands were calloused from hard work, but something told him that Jenna Holt wasn't going to be an easy woman to forget. For the first time in a long while, Wyatt felt like he might actually be in over his head. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice more firm this time. Jenna gave him a defiant look. "I can do whatever I want." Wyatt frowned. There was no turning back now. "I'll make you a deal," he said after a long pause. "You can stay here for a few days. Just until we figure out where Celia is, but after that, you'll have to leave. I don't know what else to do." Jenna tilted her head and studied him, sizing him up. "You don't have to do anything, but if you want to get rid of me, you'll have to try harder than that." Wyatt wasn't sure whether he should laugh or be furious. But one thing was clear: Jenna wasn't going anywhere. And for better or worse, neither was he. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Wyatt Holt had never expected his life to take such a turn. He had ordered a bride, but instead Jenna, her wild sister, had arrived. Despite his initial shock and confusion, he couldn't bring himself to turn her away. There was something in her eyes that told him she wasn't someone to be dismissed easily. Her spirit was fierce, and Wyatt couldn't help but admire that, even if he couldn't quite understand it. Jenna made herself comfortable on the ranch, despite the tension that hung between them. She wasn't going to leave until she found her sister, and Wyatt knew there was no point in trying to change her mind. She was stubborn, but he had to admit that she was also a hard worker. Every day they worked together, feeding the animals, fixing fences, and keeping the ranch in order. At first, Wyatt tried to keep his distance. He didn't want to get too involved with Jenna. After all, she wasn't the woman he had ordered. But every time he turned around, there she was, helping without being asked, offering ideas he hadn't considered. She was unlike any woman he had met before. While he had imagined someone soft and quiet, Jenna was anything but. She had an edge to her, a kind of untamed energy that made it hard for Wyatt to keep his thoughts focused. It wasn't just her work ethic that caught his attention. It was the way she looked at him, her gaze sharp and direct, as though she was reading him in a way no one ever had. And when she smiled, even if it was just a small curve of her lips, it seemed to light up the whole room. Wyatt wasn't used to being around a woman like Jenna. He had always been solitary, focusing on his ranch, his cattle, and the land that stretched out before him. He didn't have time for distractions, but Jenna had a way of sneaking under his skin, making him think things he wasn't sure he wanted to think. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the barn, the silence between them grew more intense. The sun was beginning to set, and the golden light filtered through the wooden slats, casting long shadows on the floor. Wyatt was repairing a piece of broken equipment when he heard Jenna's voice. "You ever get tired of this?" she asked, her tone casual but with an edge to it. "Tired of what?" "Of being out here all alone, day after day, just the ranch and the animals. No one to talk to but the wind and the cattle." He hadn't realized how lonely he had become. He had chosen this life, believing that work would fill the emptiness, but now he wasn't so sure. "I'm used to it," he said quietly. "It's the way things are out here." Jenna didn't say anything at first, but he could feel her eyes on him. He turned to face her, and for a moment their gazes locked. There was something unspoken between them, a silent understanding of the isolation they both felt, even if they had different reasons for it. "I get it," Jenna said at last, breaking the silence. "I grew up with Celia. We were never alone. But when we got older, things changed. I don't know if it was the place or the people or what, but I felt like I couldn't breathe anymore. That's why I left. I thought maybe coming here would be different." He had never thought about why people left their homes. He had always stayed working and building, focusing on the future, but Jenna's words stuck with him. She was different from the women he had known, strong, independent, and not afraid to speak her mind. As the days passed, Wyatt found himself thinking about Jenna more and more. It wasn't just her independence that intrigued him. It was the way she challenged him. She didn't let him get away with the usual quiet routine. She made him think about things he had never considered before. One morning as they were working together in the fields, Wyatt could feel her eyes on him. He turned to face her, and she was watching him carefully. "What is it?" he asked, feeling uneasy under her gaze. Jenna tilted her head, a small smile on her lips. "I've been wondering something." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "What? Do you ever wish things were different? Like, maybe you didn't have to do this alone? That you had someone to share this place with? Not just a wife, but someone who understands the land, who gets the work and the quiet, someone who doesn't just fit in, but belongs here." Wyatt was taken aback. He wasn't used to people asking him questions like this, especially not about his life. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I've never really thought about it that way. I just do the work. That's enough." Jenna's eyes softened. "I think you're lying to yourself." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He hadn't realized how much of himself he had hidden behind the walls he had built around the ranch. He had spent so many years focusing on his work that he had forgotten what it felt like to truly connect with someone. The next few days were filled with a strange tension. Wyatt couldn't help but notice how Jenna had become a part of his life, how her presence had started to fill the empty spaces he hadn't even known were there. Every time they worked together, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They didn't need to talk much. They just worked side by side, and somehow it felt like they were getting closer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Wyatt and Jenna sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the stars slowly appear. The air was warm, and the faint smell of pine and earth lingered in the breeze. Jenna broke the silence. "Do you think I'll ever find her?" Wyatt looked at her, his face serious. "Celia?" She nodded. "I don't know where she went." "I can't believe she just disappeared. I thought she would be here by now." Wyatt sighed, feeling the weight of her words. "I don't know. But I'll help you search. I can't promise anything, but we'll find her." Jenna looked at him, and for the first time there was a hint of something softer in her eyes. "Thanks." It wasn't heavy with uncertainty or tension. It was calm, peaceful even. They sat together side by side under the vast open sky, and Wyatt couldn't help but wonder what the future might hold. He had never planned for this, never planned on the ranch being more than just work. But now, with Jenna by his side, things didn't seem so lonely. There was still much to figure out, but for the first time in a long time, Wyatt felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had thought. The days were starting to blur together, the work on the ranch constant but oddly comforting. Wyatt Holt wasn't sure when it had happened, but he had stopped questioning Jenna's presence. The wild woman who had stepped off the wagon, not the bride he had expected, had become a regular part of his routine. Each day they worked together, feeding the cattle, mending fences, and keeping the land in order. At first he had tried to keep his distance, but now it felt like they were two pieces of the same puzzle, each complementing the other in ways neither of them had expected. It wasn't just the work that kept Wyatt occupied. It was the constant awareness of Jenna's presence. She was always near, always active, always challenging him to think differently. Every conversation they shared seemed to open up new possibilities, new ways of thinking. And yet, despite the tension that still hung between them, after all, she wasn't the woman he had ordered, Wyatt began to notice something deeper, something that made him uneasy. He didn't mind it. He didn't mind her presence. One morning, after a long week of grueling work, Wyatt and Jenna sat on the porch of the ranch house, the cool morning air giving them a brief respite from the heat of the day. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with soft pinks and oranges, and the peacefulness of the moment almost made him forget everything that had brought them together. "How long do you think it will take?" Jenna asked, breaking the comfortable silence. She was watching the cattle graze in the distance, her eyes narrowing against the bright light of the rising sun. Wyatt, surprised by the question, glanced at her. "How long for what?" "To find Celia," she said softly. "How long do you think it will take for us to find her?" The question hit Wyatt harder than he expected. It reminded him of why they were still together, because Jenna was on a mission, one that didn't involve him at all. He was just the man who had been caught up in her search. He had promised to help, but part of him was still unsure of how he felt about it. "I don't know," Wyatt said, his voice low, "but we'll find her. I promised I'd help." Jenna didn't respond at first, but Wyatt could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She had always been strong, always so sure of herself. But there was something vulnerable about her in that moment, something that reminded him of the fear she tried so hard to hide. "I know," she said, after a pause. "But what if she doesn't want to be found?" The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment Wyatt didn't know how to answer. He had never considered that. He had always assumed that Celia wanted to be found, that she had simply gotten lost along the way. But now that Jenna had spoken the words aloud, Wyatt realized that maybe he hadn't fully understood the situation. Maybe Celia had made a choice to disappear. "You think she wants to stay away?" Wyatt asked carefully. Jenna nodded, her eyes still focused on the horizon. "I don't know, but I've spent enough time with her to know that she's not the kind of person who just follows orders. If she's gone, it's because she wants to be." Wyatt sat back, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never known Celia. He had only known what the matchmaking service had promised him. And now, as he sat beside her sister, he realized just how little he really knew about either of them. Maybe Celia wasn't the woman he had thought she was. Maybe she had her own reasons for doing what she did, reasons that had nothing to do with him or the ranch. The thought bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Jenna turned to him then, her gaze softening as she met his eyes. "You don't have to keep helping me, you know. I'm not going to hold you to that promise. I understand if you want to give up on this. You don't owe me anything." Wyatt felt a surge of something. He wasn't sure what it was, at the way Jenna spoke. There was no bitterness in her voice, no anger, just a quiet understanding. It was the first time she had acknowledged the situation between them, and it made him realize how much they had both been avoiding. "I don't want to give up," Wyatt said firmly. "I gave my word. And besides, you've got no reason to do this alone." Jenna's lips curled into a small smile, and for a moment it was as if the walls that had always been between them began to crumble. There was no longer a distance between the rancher and the wild woman. Just two people who had been thrown together by fate, both trying to make the best of a situation neither of them had planned. They stood together as the sun climbed higher in the sky, a shared sense of purpose in their hearts. And as they worked side by side once more, something shifted between them. The awkward tension from before was still there, but it was no longer a barrier. It was a bridge, one that connected them in ways neither could explain. In the days that followed, the work on the ranch became more than just labor. It became a way for them to bond. They shared stories about their pasts, about the things that had shaped them, the things that had made them who they were. Jenna talked about her life with Celia, how they had both grown up in a small town where nothing ever changed. She told Wyatt about the moments when they had been close, and the moments when they had drifted apart. Wyatt, in turn, shared stories of his childhood, his struggles to build the ranch from nothing, and the loneliness that had come with it. He told her about the family he had lost and how he had thrown himself into work, hoping that it would fill the void. And as they worked, as they shared these parts of themselves, Wyatt began to see Jenna differently. She wasn't just a woman who had stepped off the wagon and into his life. She was someone who understood the weight of the world, someone who had faced hardships and fought through them. One evening, as they sat together, watching the stars come out over the darkening sky, Wyatt found himself speaking words he hadn't intended to say. "You know," he began, his voice quiet but certain, "I never thought I'd be here with you, doing this. But now, I don't know. It feels right." Jenna looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I never expected you to be the one who would change things, but you have. You've made me see things differently." Jenna smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I think you've done the same for me." For the first time in what felt like a long while, Wyatt allowed himself to believe that maybe this wasn't all just some mistake. Maybe, just maybe, the wild woman who had stepped off the wagon was the one he needed all along. The search for Celia had stretched on for weeks, the dust settling over the ranch with each passing day. Wyatt and Jenna had traveled across the nearby towns, asking anyone who might know where Celia had gone. They visited ranches, saloons, and even spoke to travelers passing through. Every time they thought they were close to finding her, they were left with more questions and fewer answers. But as the weeks passed, the exhaustion of the journey began to weigh on both of them. Wyatt couldn't help but notice how the work at the ranch had changed too. While he had once worked alone, now there was always a presence beside him. Jenna's voice, her laugh, the quick way she could get things done. He found himself not just working with her, but looking forward to the moments they shared. The tension had shifted, the uneasiness fading into something more familiar. They weren't just strangers anymore. They were two people learning to trust one another, learning to be together, even if neither one of them had planned it. One afternoon, as they sat in the shade of the porch, the heat of the sun beginning to dip into a cooler evening breeze, Wyatt watched as Jenna worked to repair one of the fences. Her hands were calloused from the hard labor, her face flushed from the day's work, but there was something peaceful about her in that moment. It was a far cry from the wild woman who had first stepped off the wagon, and yet Wyatt realized she hadn't changed at all. She was still the same woman, still independent, still fiery, but she had become a part of his world in ways he hadn't expected. He couldn't deny it anymore. He cared for her. In the quiet moments when they sat together, when they worked side by side, something between them had deepened. He had never thought it would happen this way, but somewhere along the line he had stopped seeing her as just the woman who'd arrived by mistake. She had become more. "Wyatt?" Jenna's voice pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up at her, meeting her gaze. She was holding a small, folded letter in her hand, the paper weathered from the journey. The envelope was marked with a stamp from the last town they had visited. "What's that?" Wyatt asked, his curiosity piqued. Jenna hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the letter before she slowly approached him. "It's from Celia," she said quietly. "I don't know if it's the answer we were hoping for, but it's the answer we've got." Wyatt's heart skipped a beat. He had almost forgotten what it was like to hope for an answer. He had become so wrapped up in the search, in the daily grind of ranch life, that he hadn't realized how much he had been waiting for this moment. Jenna handed him the letter, her hand brushing against his. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like something more. He unfolded the paper carefully and began to read. Wyatt, I know this letter will come as a surprise, but I had to write to you. I've been away for a while, searching for something I couldn't find here. I came to Blackridge with one idea in mind: to marry a man I didn't know, to be a part of something I didn't understand. But after everything that happened, I realized I wasn't ready for the life you offered. I needed to find myself before I could be anyone's wife. I know I hurt you by leaving without a word, but I hope you can understand. I'm not the woman you thought I was, and I may never be that woman. I found a new life, one that's mine to choose. And for that, I'm grateful. I wish you all the best, Celia. Wyatt stared at the letter, the words sinking in slowly. Celia hadn't wanted the life he had imagined for them. She hadn't run away out of fear. She had run away because she had needed something else, something he couldn't give her. And in that moment, Wyatt realized that he had never truly understood her. He had wanted her to fit into a life he had already planned out, but he had never taken the time to see who she really was. Jenna sat down beside him, her eyes soft as she watched him process the letter. I told you she wasn't the woman you thought she was, she said quietly. Wyatt nodded, feeling a strange weight lift from his chest. He didn't know what he had expected from Celia, but it wasn't this. It wasn't the freedom she had found for herself. And yet there was something freeing about it for him, too. He had been holding on to the idea of what his life should be, and now that the truth had come, he knew it was time to let go. She's gone, Wyatt said, more to himself than to Jenna, and maybe that's for the best. I don't think I could have made her happy if I had tried. Jenna's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. You did what you thought was right, she said gently. But now you get to choose what's right for you. Wyatt looked at her, his heart heavy with the realization that he had already made his choice. She had been with him through all of this. The searching, the waiting, the confusion. She hadn't turned away, hadn't left. She had stayed, even when it would have been easier to walk away. He turned to face her fully now, his voice low but steady. Jenna, I never asked for this, but I'm glad you're here. I didn't know what I needed, but now I do. It's you. Jenna's eyes met his, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. The truth was clear between them now, and the distance that had once been between them seemed to vanish. Without another word, Wyatt reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. It felt natural, like this was how it was always supposed to be. The world around them seemed to fade as they stood together, not as strangers, but as something more, something real. I think I'm ready for a new life, Wyatt said quietly. One where I don't have to do everything alone, and I want you to be a part of that life. Jenna smiled softly, her eyes sparkling with the same warmth he had come to know. I think I'm ready too, she said, squeezing his hand, for whatever comes next. And with that, they both knew that the future was theirs to shape. They didn't have all the answers yet, but they had each other, and that was enough. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of possibility. Together, Wyatt and Jenna would build a life that neither of them had expected, but one that was all their own.